Lo logramos de nuevo. Verizon fue nombrada por RootMetrics como la red más confiable del país y nuestros clientes nos calificaron como número 1 en calidad entre todas las redes del país según J.D. Power. Número 1 en confiabilidad 16 veces consecutivas. La red más premiada en calidad 27 veces consecutivas, demostrando una vez más que nadie diseña redes como Verizon. Por eso diseñamos 5G como debe ser. Por eso, mejor red hay solo una.
Hello, I'm Maureen Reedy, the president and CEO of the Paley Center for Media, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to a very important Paley Impact program, the growing influence of Hispanic voices in journalism. This program is part of the Paley Center's annual Hispanic Heritage Month celebration, a salute to Hispanic achievements in television, and we thank Verizon, our official sponsor. Across all categories of media, the distinct voice, perspective, and ideas of the Hispanic community are more present and well represented than ever before. In both English and Spanish language media, journalists and executives are bringing attention to vitally important stories, including the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, immigration, economic empowerment, and the growing political and social influence of the Hispanic community. Never before has Paley's mission been more vital, as media has been the undisputed connector during these unprecedented times. And Paley is uniquely positioned to meet this moment with impactful conversations led by thought leaders such as our esteemed guests today. They will share their insights into media's vital role in ensuring that Hispanic voices and perspectives are represented on air in the ranks of executive leadership and in the editorial approach of leading news organizations. Joining us are Jose Diaz-Balart, anchor of Noticias Telemundo and NBC Nightly News Saturday. Ilia Calderon, anchor for Univision News. Omar Jimenez, correspondent at CNN. Maria Elena Salinas, independent journalist and producer. And Cecilia Vega, chief White House correspondent and anchor for ABC News. Now, before we start the program, there's just a few brief housekeeping notes. If you are tweeting, our hashtag on Twitter is #Paley. And just to note that we always appreciate when folks like our programs on social media. And we also invite you to click on the subscribe button below this video and subscribe to the Paley's YouTube channel. But now I'm so pleased to welcome our moderator, Maria Hinojosa, the founder of Futuro Media and author of Once I Was You. Maria is a true icon in journalism and the first Latina in many newsrooms throughout her storied career. Maria is the anchor and executive producer of the Peabody Award-winning series Latino USA and the host of the acclaimed political podcast In the Thick. In 2010, she created Futuro Media, an independent nonprofit newsroom with the mission to create multimedia content from a people of color perspective. Futuro recently debuted the podcast Loud, the history of reggaeton on Spotify. So I ask you now to please join me in welcoming our moderator, Maria Hinojosa. Over to you, Maria.
Thank you, my dear. Thank you, Maureen. I guess at this point, we should definitely have some reggaeton happening because, hey, it's the hottest podcast around. It's called Loud. It's hosted by La Queen, La Ivy Queen. Listen, it's great to be here with you. I'm so thrilled to be able to be part of this conversation with the Paley Center. And this is a special Paley Impact, the growing influence of Latino voices in journalism. And that's going to be our conversation today. The program is part of Paley Center's annual Hispanic Heritage Month celebration, a salute to Latino achievements in television. And they want to thank the official sponsor of Verizon for their support. So throughout Latino Heritage Month, the Paley Center is celebrating many of the most important and official icons of our business. I don't know, some of them are right here on this panel right here. And really discussing the importance of Latinos and Latinas in our presence in media. So it's really wonderful to be a part of this conversation. And to my compañeras and compañeros and fellow journalists on the panel, what's up, what's up? It's great to see you. I wish I could hug you all. And as I told, so those of you who are watching, just so you be clear, I told my panel, I said, the idea is to interrupt each other. So just because, it's hard to do on Zoom. So don't get freaked out if we're all journalists and we like to use our mouths. So here's the first thing I want to throw out to all of you as we're talking about Latinos and Latinas. And I don't think I'm not into the months. I'm into every single day, because here's the point. Latinos and Latinas are the second largest voting bloc in the United States of America. So it's not really like, oh, how do Latinos feel? Latinos and Latinas, really, the future of democracy really rests in our hands, right? And for me, I'm obsessed with how or how not the mainstream media is covering us. So that's kind of my obsession. And actually, let's start with you, mi querida María Elena. When I say that to you, and I say I am, I'm a little obsessed with watching the news when I do watch it, and not seeing Latinos and Latinas at every turn, because we are the second largest voting bloc in the United States. So am I wrong to be obsessed with this? Are you thinking the same thing? Or are you feeling like, no, I mean, I see you on CBS News. This makes me very happy. So what's your sense?
I mean, that's a good question, Maria. And I think the key word that I've been hearing since we started here is Latino voices. So I do see Latina faces. I do see Latino names. I think every network has several Latinos. By the way, I'm no longer with a contributor with CBS News, but I can tell you that CBS News has 7 or 8 Latino correspondents, and any given day, whether it's the newscast or the morning show, you will always see a Latino there. Now, there's a big difference between having the presence of a Latino and having their voices. That, I think, continues to be an uphill battle, and one that you have been fighting throughout your entire career, and it is getting a little tiny bit better. And I must say that possibly every newsroom nowadays has a race and culture unit, but I really wish that they would change the name to race, culture, and ethnicity. Otherwise, I feel that we are being left out and our stories are being left out.
Orale, Cecilia, I saw you jump in.
You know I'm about to jump in.
You can interrupt me if you want, Cecilia. It's okay. I can't interrupt because my mommy would get mad at me.
I'm only doing what Maria tells us to. I don't want her to get mad at me. Look, Maria, I'm obsessed too. I'm obsessed in a different way. I mean, I watch every network, and I actually think, I don't want to get in trouble here, I actually think all the networks and the cables do a really good job of on-air representation. My obsession is not in front of the camera. My obsession is behind the camera. I can get on the air. I can anchor Good Morning America. I'm at the White House. Like, I think we do a good job of that. I want to know that in addition to our race and culture teams, which do a great, important job, I want to know that there's a Latino overseeing the weather coverage. I want to know that there's a Latino reading scripts and approving stories on sports and on the White House and on politics. And I think that is where we have a really long way to go still. We've made strides. ABC just last week named an immigration producer, but we just last week named an immigration producer. And that's a good thing, but I want to see more networks behind the scenes. I want to see more Latinos in glass offices. I want to see more Latinos at the editorial table who are deciding which stories get covered and don't get covered, and who goes out on the campaign trail in 2022. That to me is where I think we're still lacking and have so much work to do.
Absolutely. And you know what? Can I just say I am so pleased and in awe to be with each one of you. And I see, for example, Maria Elena and Ilia. Here are two people that are the pillars of one of the most important networks in the United States, right? So it's just like a string weaving through the history of television in the United States. Maria Elena and Ilia, what an extraordinary body of work you both have, as well as all of you. You know, what an amazing thing, Maria Hinojosa, to be able to listen to you, to read you, to admire you, and to know that you're not just a great, extraordinary correspondent and reporter and analyst, but you're also an amazing person that we look up to. What a thrill to see Omar. What a thrill to see Cecilia everywhere. Right? When she dances, we all dance. And then, the White House is never been more importantly covered than when Cecilia is covering it. And I just wanted to say, like, I've often thought of that term, like, we need a seat at the table. No. We need to own the table. And that includes people that are in front of the camera, people that are, in front of the microphone, but also the people that are deciding who is in front of that microphone and in front of that camera.
But Jose,
and
like things for you, things for you, you just got named. You have your own show on MSNBC, I think on the weekends, right?
No, 10 a.m. Monday through Friday.
Oh, ¿qué? Felicidad. Whoa, congratulations, bro. Good. Well, I'll see you there. That's exciting. That's a big deal. So what is your response to this other question that the compañeras have brought up, which is actually, and true, I mean, seeing Cecilia Vega covering the White House, being there, asking those questions, and Ilia también, o sea, changes everything.
It does.
What about this notion of, but at the highest levels editorial? Because actually NBC does have some pretty senior Latinos and Latinas.
Just recently, Cesar Conde, who is really one of us, I mean, is now, the president of NBCU News, chairman of it. And he was put in he just, announced some time ago, and this is not to promote him, it's just a fact. He said, NBC Universal News will be 50% women, 50% people of color in the near future. And he's already acted upon that. I just got the opportunity on MSNBC. There's, Tom Llamas, who's a dear friend of all of ours, is coming in. And so, that's a very important step. It's a recent step, but an important one. And I think that we really need to see more of that happening before we can see not only the faces of each one of us in front of the camera, but also behind the camera, and editorial decisions and hiring decisions, and even how the news is covered, in what news is covered, really depends on people being there throughout the infrastructure of the news departments. Which is a perfect way exacto.
I think we all have a big challenge here on how to open opportunities for those that are going to be behind the cameras or at the decision-making table. Like, how can we make sure that we nurture an entire generation that is going to work behind the cameras or is going to be at the decision-making tables, making the editorial decisions that we need for our stories to be heard and for our stories to reach the entire audience in English and Spanish, because our stories are not only for us. If we do our stories only for us in Spanish, we are not making, or we're not having the same impact as if our stories are listened and viewed and heard by everybody. So we have a challenge here, not only with the talent, which is important to have them in front of the camera and follow your steps, Maria Elena's, Jose's, but behind the cameras as well.
Well, and I think I'm kind of a product from that, where, I mean, at the end of the day, when you look at the people that are going to make some of the major decisions in hiring people like us, these are people that are behind the camera that have nurtured their expertise, coaching some of the best in the business. And for me personally, there was someone who's still at CNN. Some of you might know Ramon Escobar. He is someone who took notice of me when I was an intern at CNN, and he saw how important it was to stay in touch with someone like me. And I saw how valuable it was to have someone at that level, at a talent recruitment level, who is vouching for you, who says, you know what, this is someone we should pay attention to. And while I do think I'm good at my job and I'm good at what I do, I was given the opportunity to start on air at CNN when I was 23 years old. That does not happen unless someone is sticking their neck out for you and they fully believe in what you can bring to the table. And the other thing that this made me think about was, it's a little different for me. I'm correspondent level. I'm out in the field, and a lot of my decision making comes down to the stories I pitch and the people I interview as part of these stories. And there are two things that always come to mind as part of it. One is, when you're interviewing a lawyer or a doctor, that's what the story calls for. If there is an opportunity to interview someone who is from the Latino or Hispanic community, I choose to do that, not because I want to show preference to it, but I want to be able to show America as a whole that this is what professional success looks like. This is what someone who has immigrated first generation or second generation from their countries has come through, and this is the life they've been able to create here in this country, similar to what you may have initially thought a doctor or lawyer should look like. And the other thing is, for me in particular, trying to go into some of these communities where they're not speaking a lot of English, because I think as English primary channels, we lose so many stories because we choose not to tackle that language barrier. And we lose so many stories because we don't tend to fight our editors in tackling this language barrier. And the example that I can cite from here in Chicago, there's a neighborhood here called Little Village, La Villita here, and they were hit incredibly hard by COVID. And they weren't really being covered that much in the Tribune and the Sun-Times. We went in there and the stories we got were people who hadn't spoken to the media purely because they were not comfortable with their English. And that was the first time I had done a story translated for our audiences, but completely in Spanish. And I think the value we got out of something like that was
it's amazing.
We said that we could interrupt. I just want to ask Omar something really quick. Omar, I was, of course, I Google everything and everyone. I was Googling your ethnic background. You have Colombian blood, right?
Yes.
Yes. Colombiano.
Colombiano, sí, claro.
Okay. All right. That was your question, Maria Elena?
That was my question, but I also have a comment. Question.
So let's make it clear you're Colombian.
I swear to God, I Google everybody that with a Hispanic last name, what their ethnicity. I just want to know. I don't know. It's curious.
I love it. I love
Mark
it.
Of a good reporter right there.
So it's interesting what
to this comment, because like Kelly was saying, Spanish language media does an extraordinary job in reporting to our community and reporting our stories. After a while, I think that we are preaching to the choir. And the reason why, to me, it's so important to tell our stories in mainstream media is because we are mainstream, because
exactly.
The largest minority, because the majority are U.S. citizens, 75% of Latinos are bilingual. If there's a choice of watching English and Spanish, sometimes I gravitate to Spanish, not so much because of the language, but because of the content. So I think, number one, we need to report to that community. And number two, mainstream America needs to know who we are, because even though we have such deep roots here, sometimes we're still treated as if we were foreigners in our own country. And we end up acting as if we were foreigners in our own country.
Exactly. So I have to let you all know, Futuro Media, my little company, right? That's a nonprofit. We produced Loud, which is the history of reggaeton. Actually, was in the introduction. It's now the #1 music podcast in the world via Spotify. The reason why I'm bringing it up no es para echarme las flores, but okay. But because of what Omar was saying in terms of our audience, in terms of our actual population growth and such. So and the question of bilingual. So interestingly, with Loud, for example, we're not doing a lot of translating. Like, it's subtle. Sometimes you'll hear Spanish and you won't hear a translation, but you'll figure out what's out. And we're experimenting with this because we believe, like all the stats that Maria Elena just gave, right? We are the mainstream. And so then we actually do, hablamos así, de repente we'll be speaking English and we'll, entramos un poquito in it, and it doesn't really faze us. And a lot of people also understand it. But it is, in our kind of doing that in Loud, for example, it is a recognition of saying bilingual is mainstream. And I love this notion. So the truth is, though, that we are not, and now, este es mi otro friqueo, is that if we were once battling invisibility, now it's like what we're taking on is we're having to deconstruct an image that has been created of us over the last 20 years, since we're marking 20 years. And how do you feel about that? And that actually is for those of us who have been around a while, right? Before it was just like, see us, we have stories. Now it's like, see us. And also we have to make sure that you don't think that we are all recent arrivals, members tied to MS-13. Yeah, ustedes saben. Do you feel the same way that now we actually have to deconstruct a stereotype that has been created and uplifted over the last 20 years?
I mean, I was just in a meeting the other day where I was like, we were talking exactly about this demographics and looking at some research and targeting Latino audience and viewership. And I I sort of like put my hand like this and I was like, oh my God, we've been having this conversation since like Ricky Martin in 1993. Like, like since he started selling like Pepsi on air, like, yeah, Latinos watch American TV. Yeah, Latinos buy American stuff. Yes, we speak English. Yes, we're not all Democrats. Yes, we don't only care about the border. I mean, I'm just like, God, yeah, cansada, you know, it's too much. I'm tired. It's a broken record at this point.
But it's like we're also to blame, don't you feel, fellow periodistas?
That's why what Omar does and what Omar told us about is so important. And I know that each and every one of you has done that. And it is, you know, I can't tell you, and I'm 37 years on television. I mean, when Maria Elena, who came in a little later, because she's younger, when Maria Elena and I were doing what we were doing, starting, there was no Omar Jimenez or Cecilia Vega or even Maria Hinojosa on the national screen. And so what Omar does, and I think, and I'd like to ask all of you, because how many times have we not said to people that we work with in the past, hey, when we're doing a story about immigration, let's not show as VO people jumping a fence.
Okay. Exactly.
When we're doing a story about Wall Street, let's make sure that among the people that we interview, probably the top, mergers and acquisitions giants are Latinos, African Americans. Let's make sure that we talk to them because they're probably more successful than the ones that in the past television has been used to showing, and yet they're invisible because we don't show them. That's why what Omar does, what Cecilia does, what Maria Hinojosa, every single one of you does, is so important, but because it has to be done over and over and over again. Very quickly, my biggest, I guess 7 years ago when I first started going in national television and NBC, one of my biggest points of pride was they use accents on my name. Los tildes están en el super. And that had never been done before. I'm not saying I'm a trailblazer. I'm just saying you can get it done.
Small victories.
Yeah.
With an I, put la cosita.
Put la cosita. Óyeme, Ilia, so you actually don't have that battle that Omar, Jose, Cecilia, myself, not Maria Elena Salinas either, in saying you cannot put that VO of people jumping the fence on anything that I do. So I think for me, of course, we all know this, Spanish language media is telling one narrative. And the US media about Latinos and Latinas and the US MSM, the mainstream media, is telling something very different. And I'm sure that this is incredibly frustrating for you too, because actually, if I'm watching the network news, I'll choose to watch Univision or Telemundo because I think that you do a better job in international news coverage.
Sometimes, Maria, we get caught up on immigration, that topic that is so important for our community. But we know that their needs are on economy, education, health, housing, and we need to, refocus on what our people what they need to know. Is not only immigration, and we are not, targeted like, they solamente hablan de migración. No, we need to, as Telemundo and Univision, have that responsibility of showing the stories of our immigrant community, right? Now, we have a 30-minute show. You said that, about the international news and educating our audience as well. Sometimes it's nothing. 30 minutes is nothing to tell stories, to inform people, and to cover international news. We do our best, and we always can do better, right? But yeah, we get caught up in the time and sometimes the topic that we think is the most important for our community.
And it's going to get actually even more intense. I don't know, Omar, how much you know about like the media battles, but Univision now and Televisa that I grew up watching because I'm Mexican. And so everybody knows that Televisa is basically government supported. And now that media getting involved in the United States on Spanish language media. I mean, at CNN, because I was there, I was the first one. And you, Omar, you and I have never had a chance to talk about
You were the trailblazer.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Myself and Rose, thank you, sweetie. Thank you so much. Myself and Rose Arce. But, one of the reasons why I had to leave CNN was because, and I don't think I've ever told that publicly, but okay, the truth is, because I always like to deal with the truth. I was convinced that if I ended up with Lou Dobbs in the elevator, because Lou and I know each other, right? But then Lou kind of went a little bit to the extreme. And I just said, if I run into Lou Dobbs in the elevator, it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be pretty anymore because now I'm angry. And that was a choice that CNN, basically, they were like, we're putting our eggs in the Lou Dobbs basket and not kind of in a more, what I was proposing, a futuristic basket. And I'm just wondering for you, Omar, when you hear those stories of those kinds of battles of that CNN that was every single night putting on those images actually as part of Lou Dobbs' introduction to his show, how do you see, because you're in a different place at a different network, and I don't really know what the vibe is internally. What is the vibe internally, and how much fighting do you have to do to get the stories covered, like the ones from Pilsen and Little Village in Chicago?
Yeah. Now, what makes me feel good about that story, the only thing that does, is that feels foreign to me right now. So you went through that battle, and that is awful. But for me, it's almost something that things would have to go so extremely for me to now feel like, what, I have no outlet except to potentially yell at Lou Dobbs in an elevator. I don't feel.
Which I would watch both of that programming.
Yeah. Put the Beyonce, Jay-Z video camera in the elevator. We'll get it going. But to your question about how hard it is to fight, I actually have found it to be a very inviting pitching environment. Whether this last year and an added microscope on people's cultural, racial, ethnic experiences played a role in that or not. The receptiveness to the people I pitched to has been great. Now, are there times where I have to, for example, the Little Village story is a good example because Chicago, while it does have a rich Mexican heritage, Puerto Rican heritage on the west side of the city here, it's not necessarily known nationally as this huge hotspot for Hispanic life. And so when I was trying to pitch this story, it took a lot more convincing to show that if you go into this neighborhood, everything is in Spanish. Nothing is in English here. Every single, there is literally a block with, I think, 10 quinceañera stores specifically for quinceañeras, which you're not going to see that anywhere else. And so I really had to push them to say, you will get an accurate representation of what the Latino experience with COVID is by just going to this neighborhood. And when they got that, they said, you know what, let's go. And I will say in situations like that, and I'm sure all of you all have felt this, when you sort of get that green light, there's a little bit of pressure now, right? Because now they've given you the opportunity. You've asked for it. They've given you the opportunity. And so you feel it's even more on you to get the story right, to find the heart of the story, and to show why people outside the Latino community should care about their fellow Americans. And so I think that once you've done it once, sorry to say, I mean, this is a business. We know how it is, the risk averse versus non-risk averse executives. Once you've done it once and show that you can do it well and people receive it well, it makes it a little easier for hopefully the next person to come down the line, but especially for yourself when you want to go back to that story and say, remember that story? Well, we can do that again here and it'll be just as important.
I find it so interesting that you would have senior journalists at a place like CNN not aware of the importance of Latinos and Latinas in a city like Chicago, because what about the mayor's race for Chuy? I mean, who was like, that was a national story. Yeah. I'm more like, are they aware that if you go to deep Minnesota, right, west of Minneapolis, and you go to a little town called Wilmer, that you're going to see un montón de Mexicanos and Puerto Ricans working alongside Somali American citizens now, working alongside white folks in the middle of Minnesota. And I'll throw this out because I'm like, I don't want to say because we are not to blame. This group here, that we are not to blame. But our profession is to blame in that Omar is still having to fight for that story where it's just like, do you not get what Cecilia was saying, which is we are watching CNN and MSNBC and the cable news. We're watching it in English. And I'm like, this is where I do get frustrated because I'm like, that person should have known better.
I mean, the reality is, I'll say this bluntly, because perhaps there are younger producers and folks in the business who are watching. Like the six of us, we can pitch a story and it's going to get on, right? Like that comes with doing this for the amount of time that we've done. Knock on wood, I could pitch a story and do it, and I will be heard in my network for the reasons that I've worked to.
Because you're a badass and you never stop fighting. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know. Thank you, but I never have stopped fighting. Yes, but I want these stories to be told. And look, we're doing this amazing special on Friday. That's an hour coverage. I'm like you. I hate Hispanic Heritage Month, but this special, it's geared at that. But this is not like corporate sponsor Hispanic Heritage Month. This is like we're dealing with crazy stuff like identity and othering and colorism in our own communities, like stuff that normally like we would never touch as a network. And so I'm like super proud of that. Put that in a box over here. What concerns me, not just at ABC, but for all tel broadcasts particularly, is if I can get my stories heard, great. But what about my 20-year-old, 23-year-old producer who's out there in Philly and sees a really good story and comes in and is like shouting to the top of the mountain to get that story covered? That is where I think the diversity in the senior producer ranks that we all still lack needs to come in, because then those producers won't have to fight so hard. What concerns me for them is the frustration that we've all fought for all of our careers, and then people leave.
I was just going to say,
we have a pipeline problem, and we don't have a pipeline problem. We have a lot of really smart young people, but I ask this to the universe, like, are we doing enough to make sure they are being heard and felt and seen and productive so that they stay? That's my concern.
Because if we lose more and more Latino journalists, it's bad for all of us, given the fact that Latinos are the second largest population in the United States. Maria Elena, jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say who is supposed to be opening those doors? Are we supposed to be helping open those doors? Are we supposed to be knocking on the door of our superiors that maybe will listen to people at a certain level and not them? Do we expect them to just automatically open their minds up to it? I mean, Cecilia, I can tell you that I've worked with Kim and she is amazing. And I know that she will be open to it, because just about every story that I did on CBS that was Latino related was because of her. So, I'm not worried there. I'm not worried at MSNBC either, because I know that Cesar Conde is going to make sure that we are well represented there. And Univision doesn't have a problem with that, of course, because, all of our stories are. And like you say, Omar, the same thing with CNN, little by little, I think they're opening up and they're beginning to realize that a lot of our audience out there is Latino, is bilingual, that they are losing out on having a potential audience, not just right now, but in the future, because the Latino community is growing and growing and growing. Our census says that there's 62 million. I'm sure it's grossly undercounted, because Latinos were so afraid to participate in this last census. But there's a lot of us out there. We're 18.5% of the population now. Maria, you said in the beginning, we're the second largest voting bloc, but we are the number one minority. We're the highest minority. And that is only going to grow. So we're not going anywhere. This is the reality.
But how can we make sure that we have like more Ramon Escobars or more Kims or more Cesar Condes at that level of the decision making, right? That's what we need. And I totally agree with Cecilia and Maria Elena.
That goes to the question that Cecilia raises, which is very real. Like, it's very different. In my company, the journalists in my company don't leave because they're frustrated about not doing good journalism in my company. The journalists in my company leave because they're being scooped up by the New York Times or, Mother Jones or et cetera, et cetera. That's why they end up going to these much bigger positions. But within networks, it takes a particular kind of strength. And I think Cecilia's question is valid. And it's really for you all, like, do you have to, and we've done this before. I mean, Maria Elena, Jose, we've been around that we know that it's been done before, but do we again need to be doing much more intensive work with our younger journalists to say, come into the mainstream news?
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure.
¿Cómo lo ves, Maria Elena? ¿Cómo lo ves? Like, how do you see that?
I mean, I see it all the time. In fact, during the time that I was at CBS, there were a lot of young Latino producers, associate producers, some interns that would come to me and ask me. And I said, well, I'm a contributor. I don't really have, a lot of weight here. He says, yeah, but can you give us advice? How do we do it? What do we say? How do we pitch our story? How do I get them to listen to us? And they weren't listening to them. And I always tell them, raise your hand. If you have to tell them 20 times, maybe they'll listen once, but it's okay. I mean, if we have, like they say, and not to exclude the men here, but, women have to work twice as hard to get half of the recognition. Well, Latinas have to work 3 times as hard to get a third of the recognition, but it's okay. It's okay because we have that, I guess, that God-given ability to multitask, and we're not afraid to fight. We're not afraid to raise our hand. We're not afraid because we have that example of our own families and their struggle, and knowing that, if you got to work harder, we have that work ethic. So we don't mind. Now we go and complain and say, ay, no me hacen caso. No. No me haces caso. Well, I'm going to remind you again and again and again and again and again. But I'll tell you one thing. I am tired of doing the Latino 101 thing. I mean, right? At this stage of the game, really, I mean, with high-level executives, you have to explain, and they're like, "Oh, really? There's that many? Oh, really?"
That's what I'm saying about the Omar thing. It's like, come on, you have to know this, right? I mean, and Latinos and Latinas, we are the powerhouse consumers. We're driving the housing market. We're, creating businesses. And so that part of it, I agree with you, Maria Elena. I am tired of the Latino 101. Jose Diaz-Balart, you wanted to jump in.
Well, one of the things that I think is the problem is that, we have and historically had a lot of people in positions of power that were never once I was you. They've never been us. And so their perception of what the Latino community is based on very limited and, a handful of people they've met in the Latino community, other than those that they see in work in restaurants or in whatever they may be. And, I've had experiences where I've heard people say, but the Latino community is this. And they're defining what they think the Latino community is because of their personal, very limited relationships. And that's a reality. Where I think as Latinos have, and I am the first one to say I'm the biggest culprit of this, is we haven't made enough effort to include Afro-Latinos in our coverage. And Ilia, who has an extraordinary book and who is an extraordinary representative of all that is good about media, we don't and haven't done a good enough job in showing the vastness of the Latino community, not just economically and socially, but also who we are. And that thread that makes us all Latinos is a very diverse thread. And I think that we haven't done a good enough job.
Because there's a color problem and a colorism problem
that we need to recognize as in our community.
We need to recognize.
I mean, we need to start by recognizing that is within our own Hispanic community, racism and colorism. And that's the point where we need to start, to include everybody, Indigenous, Blacks.
Yeah. So interestingly, I don't know if you all know this or if it's true. So I was we're feeling a little bit like whiplash because, on the one hand, you have the end of the war in Afghanistan, and you have now Afghanis looking for refuge, and the United States saying maybe not so quickly. You have the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and so many feelings around that. You have a decision in Texas limiting women's rights to choose in this country. And then in Mexico, you have a move towards actually decriminalizing abortion. And then Mexico, which is certainly not perfect at all, but then they say, by the way, we're going to take down a statue of the admiral Christopher Columbus, and we're going to replace it with an indigenous woman. And it turns out actually that the sculptor of the indigenous woman is a white Mexican man. So it's like, right. I love the fact that we as Latinos and Latinas are also saying we have issues. And so naming Latinos and Latinas does not in and of itself solve the problem. I wonder your thoughts about how we as Latinos and Latinas understand our role within the greater context of kind of American history. I'm having this thing where it's like, I'm so glad that I read about Frederick Douglass, because Frederick Douglass is like my founding father of journalism in this country. Because honestly, I feel hopeful. And I think that our people tienen mucha esperanza, a lot of hope. So I hate to be like the Debbie Downer, but I do think that there is just so much work now that is facing us. And it doesn't get any easier. And it does feel very confusing what is happening in this country. And I don't think I'm the only one. Omar, you're the youngest one. I mean, obviously you're the youngest one. Don't be so surprised. He's like, am I?
Look, you said it. I said nothing.
Yo creo que tienen la misma edad.
So Omar, when you hear this kind of level of conversation and our deep concern about kind of the politics of this country, given that Latinos and Latinas, yes, we're the second largest group in the country, but second largest voting bloc. I do think it's interesting. And you're like, the narrative is very different from where you are right now. And do you feel like the battles are going to just continue to increase? Or do you think that there's a little bit of hope?
I think there's definitely hope. I'm always one to have hope. And I will say what's interesting, and I've said this to many students who I've spoken to, is that I always say that your relationship with your direct manager, wherever you end up, is one of the most important relationships that you can have. Because even if someone is completely different from you, like my direct boss is a white guy, definitely not Hispanic in any way. We could not be more polar opposite ethnicity wise. And I think we both learn from each other. He is humble about what he does not know. I'm humble about what I don't know. And both of us, I think, have grown because of that. That's why I am hopeful. So that now when I pitch a story that might lean more into my culture or my background, or he's, all right, you know what, let's do it. Even if I don't understand it, I trust you and let's make this happen. And so I think that's why I'm a little hopeful that as you inundate as much as you can, the wider public, the wider management, as new generations of management come in, I hope that they have a better eye towards experiences that they do not know. The other thing I will say is that when you were talking about history and, can you be optimistic about how history is written? They always say journalism is the first draft of history and that history is written by the victors. I think that we are in a unique position with a growing demographic that we've seen in the Latino community over the past few years, that we have a seat at the table where the history books are being written. We are leading our coverage in many cases for some of the biggest news outlets in the entire world. We, in some ways, have an obligation, a duty to, of course, do our professional jobs, but also to not be afraid to look within at ourselves and examine and say, what parts of me am I not seeing in our coverage that we're doing? Because everybody's writing their history book. You're sitting there and you could be writing something that could add and stick, or you could sit back and sort of let people write and hope that it turns out the way you'd like it. And I think that dynamic is something that's really interesting to me and something I think about a lot.
I'm feeling the weight of history. I mean, I know that it's important for all of us to say, it isn't just about immigration, clearly, right? That the Latino story in the United States is not just about immigration. Like, how did that happen? On the other hand, what's happening with immigration and specifically Latinos and Latinas is something that is so kind of inhuman and so horrific that I feel like I worry a little bit. I heard one time somebody from one of the networks say, oh, you know what, covering immigration is just not good for ratings. And my heart sunk because I was like, that's not what this is about. Jose, your sense about that? Like, I mean, I know that people are like, oh my God, here we go, another immigration story. Oh my God, it's just it. But at the same time, there is an immigration, detention, deportation, industrial complex that exists, and people are living in fear, and it's unjust. And I wonder where you kind of fall on this conversation.
It's a constant realization that people, for the most part, don't realize what exactly is going on with immigration, right? It's just Julio Varela, who works with you, Maria, who I'm a big admirer of, on a daily basis tweets out how many kids are in American government, places, and it's 15, 16,000. Is that reality known to most? Probably not. And so, how do you balance a situation where, for Ilia and myself, immigration in Spanish is pretty constant, but how do you balance that situation in English language? It's just fundamental for people to know.
Exacto.
And
that's
yet,
the point.
we can't be con la corneta, 24/7, because then you fall into this, they don't listen to you anymore.
That's what I was telling. Go ahead, Cecilia. I was just saying to the producer of this event when we were talking about it, I was like, every single one of these journalists have always been told, be careful that you don't pigeonhole yourself. And it's just like, por favor, this is great American journalism that needs to be talked about, not just for us, but for everybody. Go ahead, Cecilia.
You raised 2 points, 2 really good points. Be careful of pigeonholing yourself. I mean, yes, we all look in the mirror, and you don't want to be the brown person on the brown beat all the time. I mean, that's the reality of what we do, right? That being said, I'm sure we all share this great personal weight that sits on your shoulders, where you're like, if I don't step up, nobody else is. So damn it, I'm going to the border again. That happens, certainly. But then I get there and I think, what better person to cover this? I think back to something my mom said to me when I decided to go to the Trump White House, and she was really nervous about it. And she said, why are you going to do this? You're the 3 things he hates the most. You're a woman, you're Mexican, and you're a journalist. She was terrified for me. And I said, but Mom, what better person to be than in the front row with those 3 things? Also, like, no te preocupes, like, nobody's going to, it's fine, Mom, don't worry. But I do carry that. And then I'll just say, nobody's perfect, but look, when the Biden White House was really messing up immigration, a lot of people would say they still are, 2 months ago, when the record number of kids were crossing the border, ABC made a very deliberate decision to get me on the next flight to the border. As the chief White House correspondent, the message that would send to our viewers and to the White House, that this is an issue and a topic that we take extremely seriously, to have our White House correspondent leave the grounds of the White House and go stand out there and do a week's worth of stories and cross the border and talk to people, and not just front a package from that somebody else shot from the north lawn of the White House. That's the easy out. So I'm proud of us for that. But to your point, yeah, it becomes exhausting sometimes, feeling like you're the only one raising your hand to step that up. I don't think I'm that one. We have a lot of people who cover immigration now, and like I said, we have this great, amazing immigration producer. But I would certainly love some more help. And frankly, I would like to see, for all of us, not just Latinos, raising their hands to do this. I think that it's not fair to just put the burden on Latino correspondents and reporters to be the ones who cover the border stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a real problem with the immigration issue. I don't know if to call it a problem or not. I mean, like Ilya mentioned before, we have to be careful that immigration is not the only issue that we report to in Spanish language media or about. And I think the same thing happens in mainstream media, where you're expected to cover immigration. You don't know how many times I've been told, oh, you're the one that's going to cover immigration, or you're the one or let's do something on Latinos. Oh yeah, let's do something on immigration. Immigration is not the only issue that our community cares about. Our community cares about so many things, even our own Latino community. I mean, our own Latino community, and I realized during the election, they reject the newly arrived immigrants. Yep. I mean, the immigration issue is not just what's happening at the border. That does need to be covered, but that's not the only thing that needs to be covered. You need to cover the dreamers. You need to cover the TPS. You need to cover those who are here waiting for immigration reform. And then a lot of other issues that are related to Latinos that have nothing to do with immigration. Now, about pigeonholing, I think I'm in a very weird and maybe unique position, because I want to be pigeonholed into Latino issues. Why? Because I guess I'm at a point in my career where, I feel like I had a career And I'm very pleased and blessed. I feel blessed that I was able to have that career. So it's not like I'm trying to restart a new career. My interest right now is to take our stories to mainstream media, so that the rest of our country knows who we are and knows our stories. That's why, to me, it's important to do that. If that's the only thing I did, which I hope I do other things too, but if that's the only thing I did, I would be so happy, because I would feel like this MES 2.0 part of me would be fulfilling the dream. And the dream is to have more presence. And I don't mean me on camera presence. I mean Latinos have more presence on mainstream media. Latinos to be considered as viable citizens of this country and to be respected. I mean, that is my goal now. So you want to put it
right there with you. I'm right there with you. I love that, Maria Elena Salinas. Bueno, we could keep on going for hours, but I've been told I have to wrap up. So Ilia Calderon, Jose Diaz Balar, Omar Jimenez, Maria Elena Salinas, Cecilia Vega, all of you, seriously, you are part of this country's history. And I am just...
As are you, Maria. As are
you.
Tan linda, tan linda. I mean,
La maestra.
I'm proud to call you all colegas. I love that very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for Paley Impact. What an amazing conversation. And thanks again. The Paley Center wants to say very special thanks to the official sponsor of Verizon. Also, Paley is saying, don't forget to subscribe to the Paley Center YouTube channel right now by going to click and hit the subscribe button at the bottom of this video, and be sure to support the Paley Center and consider becoming a Paley member by going to paleycenter.org.